This was an act of gross insubordination, and frankly, a disappointment. Your tenure here is over. The words hung in the air, a crisp, clinical pronouncement from someone who held the keys to my entire professional life. I remember the sterile scent of lemon polish in her immaculate office, the way the afternoon sun glinted off the ridiculously large diamond on her finger as she gestured dismissively, and the cold knot that tightened in my stomach. She said it with an almost serene detachment, as if she were swatting a fly, not dismantling years of loyalty and hard work. I stood there, feeling the blood drain from my face, the carefully constructed scaffolding of my career crumbling around me in a silent implosion. I hadn't expected it. Not really. Not in this way, not with these words, not from her. The utter injustice of it, the sheer, unadulterated I had done to warrant such a swift and brutal end, was a physical blow. My life, up until that moment, had been a carefully choreographed dance around her volatile moods and insatiable ego. For 6 years, I had been her right hand, the buffer, the problem solver, the one who smoothed ruffled feathers and absorbed the fallout from her often reckless decisions. I'd juggled impossible deadlines, deflected blame, and celebrated her successes as if they were my own, all while biting back the constant urge to scream or to simply walk away. It was a gilded cage, certainly. The perks were undeniable, the access, the opportunities, the prestige. But the price was my sanity, my self-respect, chipped away in small, insidious increments. I'd learned to anticipate her demands before they were spoken, to read the subtle shifts in her posture, the tightening of her jaw, the slight tremor in her voice that signaled an impending storm. I became an expert in predicting and mitigating disaster, an architect of damage control. She thrived on the chaos I so diligently kept at bay, and I, foolishly, had believed that my indispensable nature would always protect me. I told myself it was a temporary arrangement, a stepping stone, a means to an end. But the end, it seemed, had arrived without warning, leaving me adrift in a sea of my own silent suffering. There was the time, about 2 years in, when a major client nearly walked because of a careless remark she'd made during a crucial negotiation. I'd spent an entire weekend crafting a carefully worded apology, drafting new proposal points, and charming the client's executive assistant with homemade cookies and genuine empathy. When she finally deigned to review my work, her only feedback was, "You're too nice. You need to be more assertive, like me." She didn't acknowledge the fact that her initial outburst had created the mess I'd spent my weekend cleaning up. Instead, she used it as a teachable moment, a lesson in her own superior brand of assertiveness. Then there was the gala, a sprawling, ostentatious affair meant to celebrate our company's latest milestone. I had poured weeks into its planning, ensuring every detail was perfect, every guest felt welcomed. She arrived late, already in a foul mood, and spent the evening making passive-aggressive comments about the catering, the entertainment, and, most pointedly, my outfit. "Darling," she'd purred, loud enough for the surrounding staff to hear, "that dress is charming. Very safe." I'd plastered on a smile, the familiar tightness in my chest a dull ache. Later that night, she'd cornered me by the champagne fountain, her breath smelling of expensive liquor and something acrid, like resentment. "You know, if you weren't so busy trying to make everyone you might actually get some real work done," she'd slurred, her eyes narrowed. I remember looking at her, this woman who held so much power over me, and feeling an overwhelming sense of emptiness. It wasn't anger I felt, not then. It was a profound sadness for the wasted years, the self-inflicted wounds of trying to earn an ounce of respect from someone incapable of giving it. I'd simply nodded, murmuring an apology, and retreated, the sounds of laughter and music fading into a hollow echo of my own internal despair. This had become my norm, swallowing insults, absorbing criticisms, and plastering on a smile, all while a part of me slowly withered. The day it all unraveled began like any other. I was at my desk, meticulously reviewing a complex proposal that required my undivided attention. The air in the office was thick with the usual low hum of productivity, punctuated by the occasional sharp clang of the espresso machine. Then came the summons. A curt email from her assistant, requesting my presence in her corner office immediately. No explanation. My stomach did its familiar flip-flop. I stood, smoothed my skirt, and walked towards the opulent sanctuary that had been both my prison and my battlefield. The office was bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. She was seated behind her polished mahogany desk, a picture of composed authority. Her face was impassive, her gaze steady. Beside her stood a man I vaguely recognized from industry events, the CEO of a rival firm, a company known for its aggressive expansion and innovative approach. The air crackled with an unspoken tension. "Sit down," she said, her voice devoid of warmth. I complied, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, trying to decipher the unspoken narrative unfolding before me. The rival CEO offered a polite nod, his eyes assessing, curious. Then, she spoke. "I've just terminated your employment." The words landed with a dull thud, like stones dropped into a deep well. Terminated. My employment. It felt surreal, a scene from a movie I hadn't auditioned for. I looked at her, searching for a flicker of explanation, a hint of the gross insubordination she'd later cite. There was nothing. Just that same, infuriatingly calm expression. "But, why?" I managed, my voice barely a whisper. She leaned back in her chair, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. "Your performance has been satisfactory. However, a certain indiscretion came to my attention. Something that compromises your integrity and, by extension, ours." She paused, letting the implication hang heavy in the silence. My mind raced, trying to pinpoint any misstep, any breach of conduct. There was nothing. Absolutely nothing. I was scrupulously ethical, meticulously by the book. "What indiscretion?" I asked again, my voice gaining a sliver of strength, fueled by the sheer absurdity of the situation. She waved a dismissive hand, her diamond catching the light. "Details are irrelevant at this point. What matters is that your position here is untenable. This gentleman," she gestured to the rival CEO, "was just discussing opportunities with me. It seems you've made quite an impression on him, perhaps even before this unfortunate revelation." The rival CEO inclined his head, a glint in his eye. "Indeed," he said smoothly. "Your reputation precedes you." My blood ran cold. She was framing this as an accusation of misconduct, a deliberate act of sabotage or betrayal, when in reality, she was the one orchestrating my downfall. The sheer audacity, the theatricality of it all, was breathtaking. She hadn't fired me she had fired me because she needed a narrative, a justification for her own petty vindictiveness, and perhaps, a way to feign a public show of ethical rigor before an audience she clearly valued. The realization settled in my gut, a cold, hard certainty. She was throwing me to the wolves, creating a smokescreen, and the rival CEO was the unwitting, or perhaps complicit, participant. I stood up, my legs feeling strangely unsteady. I looked at her, at the smug satisfaction that flickered in her eyes, and I knew, with absolute clarity, that this was not the end. It was the beginning of something else entirely. I walked out of her office, the heavy oak door closing behind me with a soft click. The hallway felt brighter, the air fresher. The knot in my stomach had transformed, not into panic, but into a steely resolve. I didn't rage. I didn't cry. I went directly to my desk, my movements deliberate and measured. I opened my laptop, not to pack my personal belongings, but to access the secure shared drive. I knew, with absolute certainty, that my dismissal was a fabrication, a lie spun to protect her and perhaps to undermine me. I had spent years meticulously documenting everything, every directive, every success, every instance of her erratic behavior that I had to mitigate. It was my insurance policy, a quiet safeguard against the very scenario that was now unfolding. I spent the next hour systematically downloading encrypted copies of relevant project files, performance reviews, both mine and those highlighting her questionable decisions, and meticulously kept logs of her expenditures and communications that hinted at improprieties. I copied contracts, strategic plans, and market analyses that showed her company lagging behind its competitors. I worked with a quiet intensity, my fingers flying across the keyboard, each click a small act of defiance, a precise chisel striking away at the edifice of her carefully constructed empire. I didn't take anything that wasn't mine, but I took everything that would illuminate the truth. As I was finalizing the last download, a notification pinged on my screen. An email from her, subject line, immediate access revoked. They were moving faster than I'd anticipated. My company email and internal systems were already locked. But my personal cloud storage was unaffected. I closed my laptop, a faint smile playing on my lips. I gathered my personal effects, not in a rush, but with a quiet dignity. As I walked out of the office for the last time, I saw her assistant hovering near her door, looking flustered. He met my gaze, his eyes wide with confusion, then averted them quickly. The rival CEO was nowhere in sight. The next few days were a blur of activity, but not the frantic, emotional kind. It was the quiet, calculated work of an architect dismantling a flawed structure. I contacted the rival CEO. Not with anger or accusations, but with a calm, businesslike proposal. I presented him with the information I had meticulously gathered. Not as a weapon against my former employer, but as a strategic advantage for his company. I showed him the data, the performance metrics, the market gaps that my former company was failing to address, and the potential for aggressive, ethical growth that they were overlooking. I laid out a roadmap, a plan for how his firm could not only acquire market share but also attract top talent by demonstrating a commitment to transparency and integrity. His initial skepticism quickly morphed into intense interest. He saw the strategic value, the competitive edge. He asked sharp, incisive questions, and I answered them with calm, factual precision. He wasn't interested in gossip or vindication. He was interested in results. He saw me not as a disgruntled ex-employee, but as a valuable asset, someone who understood the inner workings of his competitor and possessed the strategic insight to exploit its weaknesses. He offered me a position on the spot. A significant one. Then came the fallout. My former colleagues, those who had been kept in the dark and fed the narrative of my insubordination, started reaching out. First, tentative texts, then more insistent calls. Her family members, always eager to insert themselves into company affairs, began appearing, their voices laced with indignation and confusion. There were whispers, rumors, and outright accusations. The narrative she had spun began to fray at the edges, replaced by a growing unease and suspicion. People started asking questions that couldn't be easily dismissed. The carefully crafted facade began to crack. I received frantic emails from her, then angry voicemails. She demanded I retract my statements, threatened lawsuits, accused me of corporate espionage. Her pleas grew increasingly desperate, her pronouncements more hysterical. But I remained silent, my response solely through my actions and the information I continued to provide to my new employer. My old boss, once so regal and assured, began to unravel publicly. Her company's stock dipped. Key executives started leaving. The whispers turned into a roar of discontent. The rival CEO, armed with the data I provided, launched a series of strategic maneuvers that chipped away at her market dominance with surgical precision. Her company, built on a foundation of bravado and her personal whims, began to buckle. The board, once placidly compliant, grew restless. Investigations were launched. The indiscretion she had fabricated as my downfall became a glaring spotlight on her own questionable practices. The social consequences were swift and brutal. Her carefully cultivated image of success and impeccable judgment dissolved into a public spectacle of incompetence and ethical ambiguity. She lost not only her position but her reputation, her social standing, everything she held dear. I watched it all unfold from a distance, a quiet observer. There was no gloating, no triumphant declarations. Just a profound sense of quiet resolution. The satisfaction wasn't in her ruin, but in the restoration of balance, in the silent, irrefutable demonstration that truth, when systematically uncovered, has a way of asserting itself. My former boss was a cautionary tale, a testament to the fact that entitlement and arrogance, unchecked, eventually self-destruct. My revenge wasn't a fiery inferno. It was a slow, controlled burn, leaving nothing but ashes and a chilling, quiet finality. The sun still glinted off diamonds, but now they reflected a different truth.